live, and it is Tuesday, the 1st of August, 2023. I'm reading out of Time Out of Mind, which is the autobiography of Joan Grant. She passed away in 1989. She was a seer, and she used to write books about her previous reincarnations. And she wrote this book, which was published in 1956, because so many people asked her after Winged Pharaoh how she came about to be so knowledgeable, and she explains herself here. And we are in the third part of this book, chapter 7, Here and There. When A.D. and Babs went back to the Argentine in October, their baby was too delicate to stand the heat of a South American summer, so they left him with a nanny at Seacourt. Unless Mother had offered to have Donald, he would have been parked in lodgings, for A.D. always shut both his houses when he was out of England, no matter how many of his children happened to be homeless. This did not matter to the first batch now that they were grown up, but it would have made school holidays far brighter if they could have had friends to stay instead of being left in charge of a governess in some dreary boarding house. The only time, so far as I know, that he ever broke this rule was in the following year when he left Babs in Wingfield Manor to have her second baby. Perhaps Mother's natural generosity in having Donald with her warmed A.D.'s heart a little, for he told Mrs. Blundell to pay the premium on somewhere for us to live. Leslie had a deck, an armchair, a table, and a lot of books from his rooms in Trinity. I had the furniture from my bedroom at home, lots of flower vases and some wedding presents. We filled in gaps from the Caledonian Market and junk shops in the King's Road, and by the middle of November were installed in a maisonette at 33 Chain Place, Chelsea. The most optimistic balancing of money in hand versus bills showed that we could not afford a servant to live in, even had there been room for one. The minimum staff considered respectable in those days, even by penurious newly married couples, was a house parlour maid and a cook general. And a cook general could very seldom cook. "I shall do the cooking myself," I announced cheerfully. "It will not only be cheaper, but we shall have much more interesting meals." "Can you cook?" asked Leslie anxiously. This was not the moment to admit that I had never boiled an egg, but to make a bold statement and convert it as soon as possible into fact. "Of course," I said airily. "It's only a question of applying scientific principles. Anyone intelligent can do it." To help on the scientific angle, Leslie bought me a pressure cooker, an early, if not the earliest model ever found on an unsuspecting public. It was made of cast iron, so heavy it took a strong man to lift it, even when empty, and so lethal in operation that after it had twice sprayed the walls and ceiling of the kitchen with jets of far hotter than boiling soup, we gave it away as a wedding present to a couple we cordially disliked. I then followed the excellent instinct which had led me to seek advice from Ferraro at the Barclay. Someone took us to the admirable restaurant of Marcel Boudestin, and I asked him to give me cooking lessons, which to my eternal gratitude he did. At last I had a home of my own and rejoiced in it. Much occurred when we happened to feel hungry, and there were no gongs to bully us, no anxious telephoning to apologize for being late or out for dinner, no paternal scrutiny of guests. Most of our friends were still unmarried. Douglas, Richard, Fairfax, Charles, Robin, Malcolm, of course, and about half a dozen others found the place more congenial than their bachelor digs and drifted in and out as they felt inclined. I cooked for them, darned their socks, cosseted their hangovers, popped them into the dressing room bed and nursed them when they were ill, and I considered that they repaid me most royally by treating me as an equal, it having seldom occurred to me that life might be much easier if I graciously accepted the fact that I was female. Females were different. Females wore hats and gloves and little frocks and were as dangerous and unpredictable as leopards. At times I secretly envied their subtle strength, but never admitted it. How easy it must be not to have to play tennis or squash or golf unless you wanted to. How easy to look pretty instead of playing chess without a board. But I put these despicable thoughts away in a pigeonhole of my mind to be approached only furtively, like a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, gazing wistfully at a secreted bottle of gin. This peaceful pattern was interrupted at intervals by Leslie working for exams. While lesser mortals studied slavishly for 6 months before the ordeal of a bar exam, my husband dismissed the subject from his mind until the last 3 weeks. Then he went into action. At 4 p.m. I woke him with breakfast on a tray. By 5 he was at Prince's Tennis and Racquet Club in Knightsbridge, where he took violent exercise until it was time to return home to luncheon at 7:30. From 8 o'clock until midnight he worked at his books. When he dined, a proper dinner, no nonsense about sandwiches or snacks of a tray. From 1 to 8 in the morning, when he shared my breakfast, he worked again, and then he went to bed to sleep through the day. Pale as well as blanched endive, he went to the exam. Paler still, he returned to say he had failed to answer a single question, except once when he said he hadn't done too badly. This was the only time he got a second. On every other occasion, he got a first. Even after 6 months of cooking, I still quite enjoyed it, but realized it would soon begin to pall, so it seemed more sensible to earn money with which to pay someone else to do the chores. I consulted Daisy as usual in this matter, and she suggested that I might make use of my talent for arranging flowers. The more we discussed it, the better it seemed. She would grow things I needed which could not be bought in Covent Garden, and there were quantities of azaleas, rhododendrons, flowering shrubs and branches, which at that period were never obtainable even in the most expensive flower shops. Stan was then working on the Daily Telegraph, so Diana found time a bit heavy on her hands. With very little persuasion, she agreed to become my partner in a flower arranging project, which we decided to keep from our husbands until we could present them with a fait accompli. We found a shop off Curzon Street, which had a low rent, as the premises were small, but ideal for our purpose. A front room with a bare bow window and 18th century pine panelling, against which 4 or 5 flower pieces would show to the best advantage. A small room behind it would do for keeping the flowers. We would have a small but elegant black van, blazoned with a Flower Dubai, a first-class artist, and our names in excellent lettering. I would at last have an excuse for acquiring a cheetah, which would sit beside me as I drove, providing pleasure for me and publicity for our enterprise. We even consulted a chartered accountant, who agreed that as we had already got the promise of a contract from the Hyde Park Hotel to do flowers in the reception room for £1,500 a year, our scheme was quite feasible. The evening when, after giving them an admirable dinner, we broke the news to Leslie and Stan, we were, in our own minds, not only useful and independent, but affluent as well. They were far from pleased. You would be sure to make a hash of it. Neither of you have any business experience, said Stan patronizingly. You have no capital, said Leslie. Oh yes, we have, said I. Daisy is going to be the third partner and putting up the money we shall need until we start earning. No one wants their flowers done for them. Nonsense, Stan, said Diana briskly. They only put up with sweet peas and asparagus fern or carnations in silver vases because they leave the flowers to the parlour maid. We shall educate their taste. People dislike being educated, said Leslie. An unkind cut at me, which I parried by saying that the vast majority of people were so dumb that they needed education. When we are famous, we may even give lessons. People will flock to us. It will be fashionable. It's ridiculous to say you'll only sell flowers with the vases. Good God, a man looks silly enough carrying flowers wrapped up in paper. He'd look a monumental ass, slopping water all over himself. This from Stan. The vases will not have water when they are being carried, said Diana, and anyway, they will be delivered in our van. What van? Our van, the one that Daisy is buying for us, with a waterproof seat for the cheetah, I added incautiously. What cheetah? Cheetah, said Leslie coldly. Darling, don't worry them about details, said Diana hastily. We may find there isn't room for animals in our shop, and they might bite the customers. You're not going to have a shop, said Stan and Leslie. They glared, they blustered, they argued. They brought up all the unfair weapons that men use against women. That day, Diana and I found a subsidiary company of the Immemorial League of Women Against Men. It can't succeed, they cried. Or someone with far more business sense would have done it already. You will never get up early enough to get to Covent Garden. You will get no suckers to buy this stuff. The vases will get stolen, broken. We fought hard and long. We fought subtly. Diana was even brave enough to try tears. We found until we thought they had at last relented. We fought until we thought they had at last relented, but they still had a card sharper's ace tucked in their sleeve. If Diana and I insisted on going into business, everyone would know our real motive, which was to make fools of our husbands by demonstrating in public that we thought them incapable of supporting us. If you made it an issue, they would accept it, for convention no longer allowed them to beat us into submission. But did we fully understand the mockery they would suffer? Did we realize that they would have to resign from their clubs? So I sold a brooch to pay the option we had bought on a 3 years lease of the shop. Unfortunately, our anger had cooled too long for us to gain real satisfaction from pointing out to them a few years later the outstanding and quite coincidental success of Constant Spry. While all this was going on, I had not forgotten the promise I had made to myself by candlelight at Clooney. Leslie slept soundly, which was fortunate for him, as I now began to train myself to wake several times during the night so as to write down my dreams. Many were only wishful thinking or anxiety patterns, the typical patchwork of fustian and tinsel so dear to psychoanalysts. There were true dreams also, as different to the others in their quality of reality as are the solid stone walls of Windsor and the ephemeral turrets of a castle in Spain. These fell into two main categories. The first, although on a different level of experience to the one on which I functioned when awake, marched with a calendar. The second extended both in space and time, being a variant of the faculty which, for lack of a better word, I was later to call far memory. A contemporary dream I will describe in detail because it is typical of many others in which the I alternates between the experience of someone else with whom I was briefly in such close contact that his experience felt like my own, and the I that was an extension of the ordinary Joan. I'm a sailor, about 30 years old on a large liner. I'm afraid because there's fire in the ship, but I do not realize I'm in real danger until the smoke drives me back along a narrow passage and I have to climb out of the cabin window because I cannot reach the stairs. I run along the deck, but am prevented from going any further by clouds of black, heavy smoke. I look down into the sea where several men are struggling in the fire-lit water. Dare I jump? No, I can't swim. I shall be drowned if I jump. Perhaps if I run towards the bows, I shall be able to climb down to a lower deck. Paint is bubbling up into great blisters which bursts with a small sharp noise. I can hear above the noise of the fire in the sea. My feet are hurting because of the heat of the deck. I must jump, I must. It is better to drown than to be burned. I clamber over the bulwark, stand on it for an agonizing long time, and then, when a gust of heat singes my back, throw myself forward, trying to keep my feet together as I fall. The sea knocks the breath out of me. I try to swim, but I'm too heavy, too heavy. The water is crushing my ribs. No, a great hand is squeezing them. Why does the giant want to kill me? He has let go. I'm buoyant as a cork. I can swim. It is very easy to swim. Swim faster. Swim. Get away from the burning ship before she heels over. It is almost ridiculously easy to swim. Why did I never realize I could swim so well? I swim very well. I've swum a long way and yet I'm not tired. I feel stronger with every stroke I make. A wave lifts me and I see I'm very close to an island. The sun is making the water glitter, but I can see the palm trees on the island. The water is kind and smooth and warm. Then I'm no longer the sailor. I'm Joan, standing on a shelving beach of white sand, watching a man splashing towards me through the shallows. He's wringing water from his clothes when he sees me. "Good morning, miss," he said politely. "Extraordinary what you can do when you're up against it. Never done more than a paddle in my life, and there I was swimming like a ruddy champ, overarm and all. Not that I wasn't glad to see this island. Belongs to you, miss? I tell him that I'm only staying here for a little while, but that a yacht will come to pick me up before sunset. Where would he like the yacht to take him? My ship was bound for Cherbourg, but I'd rather go to Bordeaux, if it's all the same to you and no trouble. I ask if he's hungry. I have food, plenty of food, and wine too, if he would like it. He says he would prefer a coconut. Very partial to green nuts I am. Took a fancy to them when I was a deckhand on a cargo boat plying to the West Indies. I'm on a liner now. Very posh job she is. He pauses, beginning to look anxious, so I quickly change the direction of his thoughts by asking him to show me how to open a coconut. Then I say casually, have you noticed that you're dead? Dead? Me? Miss, don't talk so balmy. He picks up a paddle and throws it into the sea where it makes a most realistic splash. Then he kicks the sand with his bare foot. Dead men can't wriggle their toes. I've seen corpses in my time, and their feet were stiff as a plank. Was there fire on your ship? Yes, he reluctantly concedes, but don't let's talk about it. It will be a good story to tell over a bottle of wine when I get home. Not yet, though. It's a bit too close for comfort, if you see what I mean. How fast can you swim? You seen me, he said reproachfully. Master, matter of 10 knots or more, if I must have been doing. No one can swim as fast as that unless he's dead. You've been running around in the sun too long without a hat, miss. Very odd notion sunstroke gives some people. I remember a stoker, proper raving he was, when I was in the West Indies. I hastened to interrupt him. I've arranged our present environment with some care, and it will only confuse the issue if we find ourselves involved in the playback of a bar fight in Martinique. You are dead, I said briskly, and now I will prove it to you. Where was your ship when the fire broke out? In the English Channel. And are there coral islands like this in those waters? That shakes him for a moment. It must be one of the cities. Never been to them myself, but I have heard tell that they grow palm trees there, which is true, for I can see them, 10 good ones, with nuts on. Can I fly? If I fly, will you agree that you drowned? If you can fly, no cheating, mind you. It don't count if you've got an airplane tucked away behind them trees. I'll give you best, honest to God I will. I tried to alleviate, but so strong is his conviction that I shall stay solidly on the ground that for a moment nothing happens. Then I make an extra effort and rise into the air, do a few fancy swoops and land neatly beside him. Then he laughs, gusts of enormous and complete enjoyment, not at me but at himself. All my life I've been frightened of dying, and all it was is this. Never enjoyed myself so much as I have since I drowned. What a joke on my poor auntie, who always said I'd fry in hell when I died. If this is hell, give me lots more of it. Where do we go from here? Tell me who you would most like to be with, and I will fix your passage, I said, efficient as a clerk in Tho'mas Cook's. Must they be dead too? Not necessarily, but it would be better as a start. People who are only asleep like me are inclined to vanish rather abruptly. Well, there was a very nice-looking bloke who was torpedoed in the war. Think of him hard, I said quickly. I'm beginning to feel misty at the edges and know I'm soon going to wake up. I hear a joyous shout of recognition and dimly see 2 men thumping each other on the back, bottles of red wine on a table, the music of an accordion. I woke. The telephone was ringing. I pulled the plug out of the wall and scrabbled for my notebook. No, this was too exciting to risk losing any of it. Leslie, listen. When I told him everything I could remember, he said, "What's the name of the ship? Try hard. It would be evidence." All I can get is Atlantic. I suppose he told me the ship crossed the Atlantic before she entered the Channel, although I don't remember him saying so. Why do you think the sailor was French? His ship was on its way to Cherbourg, although I suppose she might only have been calling there on her way to Southampton or Bremen or somewhere. But I wanted to go to Bordeaux, but he wanted to go to Bordeaux, and there was wine, not beer or whiskey, in the last glimpse I had of him. When you were describing his conversation, he talked like a Cockney? The Cockney doesn't signify anything. I've noticed that When I remember a dream conversation, I automatically translate it into the nearest equivalent English. When I was in Scotland, I had a Roman dream in which a soldier seemed to speak with a marked Highland accent, merely because I'd been listening to old Robbie the day before. Well, I hope it wasn't an English ship, said Leslie, and went down to fetch the morning papers. There was nothing in any of them about a fire at sea, but when we came out of a cinema, about tea time, we saw the newspaper, placards, "Fire in Crack, French liner." The headline was, "Atlantique burns in English Channel, many dead." That was a very good description of her far memory.